Let me set the scene for you. The year is 2247. Humanity has been a card-carrying member of the Galactic Union for about 30 years. 30 years of diplomatic handshakes, cultural exchanges, and aliens slowly realizing that we are, without question, the weirdest species to ever stumble into interstellar travel. Now, the Galactic Union, in its infinite wisdom, decided to celebrate this milestone with something called the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program. The idea was simple. Each species shares something meaningful from their culture. Music, art, food, philosophy, the stuff that defines a civilization. Humanity submitted a horror movie. Not a documentary, not a symphony, a horror movie. Specifically, a remastered classic from 2019 called The Hollow Season, featuring a haunted farmhouse, a villain with a meat hook, and approximately 47 jump scares. The submission committee had debated sending Shakespeare. They went with the meat hook guy instead. Honestly, very on brand for us. So here we are. Station Meridian-9, the most sophisticated cultural venue in the known galaxy. 400 species, roughly 6,000 attendees, packed into a theater the size of a small moon, all waiting with genuine academic curiosity to experience this treasured piece of human artistic expression. And then, 7 minutes after the scheduled start time, the back door swings open. In walks Remy Cole. Remy is 34 years old, humanity's appointed cultural ambassador to the Galactic Union, and the proud holder of a master's degree in xenosociology that he uses almost never. He is wearing a hoodie. He is carrying a bucket of popcorn the size of a small child. He has a soda with 2 straws for reasons that remain unclear because he is alone. He finds his seat in the middle of 6,000 aliens, spills approximately 4 popcorns on a being made entirely of crystallized sound, apologizes in the wrong dialect, and settles in. Counselor Veth, the union's head of cultural affairs, and a gelatinous, vaguely luminous diplomat who had personally overseen 40 years of interspecies relations, leaned over from the adjacent pod and whispered, in perfect English, Ambassador Cole. "Yo, are late," Remy pointed at the screen, which was still showing the studio logo. "Movie hasn't started," he said. "I'm fine." Veth had no face, technically speaking, but somehow managed to look deeply disapproving anyway. A remarkable talent. The lights dimmed. The theater went quiet. 6,000 beings from 400 civilizations sat in respectful, attentive silence, ready to engage with human culture at its most authentic. Remy shoved a fistful of popcorn into his mouth. The movie began. The first 3 minutes were fine, establishing shots of a countryside road, ominous music, a family pulling up to a farmhouse that was, architecturally speaking, screaming at them to leave. 6,000 aliens watched with polite, scholarly interest. Several had their translation devices set to cultural analysis mode. Counselor Veth had a little holographic notepad out. Taro, a 7-foot insectoid warrior from the Keth Dominion, who had personally survived 3 border wars and a supernova evacuation, was taking actual notes. This was, by all accounts, a civilized academic exercise. Then, the basement door creaked open on screen. Nothing came out. Just the creak. Just the darkness beyond the door. Just the music doing that thing where it drops to almost nothing right before everything goes wrong. Remy ate some popcorn. The alien in seat 4G, a translucent jellyfish-like creature called a Varathi, made a sound like a wine glass shattering and teleported itself 3 rows back. Nobody had known Varathi could teleport, including, apparently, the Varathi. The family on screen walked toward the basement door. "Don't," said Remy, to no one in particular. "You absolute rookies." They went into the basement. What followed was, by human standards, a pretty solid jump scare. A figure, a crash, a scream, the music exploding back to full volume all at once. Standard stuff. Competent filmmaking. A solid 7 out of 10 on the fright scale, maybe a 6 if you had seen a lot of these. The theater detonated. There is no other word for it. 6,000 beings from 400 species all experienced mortal terror simultaneously, and each of them expressed it according to their own biology, which turned out to be extraordinarily varied and deeply inconvenient in an enclosed space. The Varathi population in the theater teleported again, this time into the ceiling. The Brelkai, a species that communicates through bioluminescent skin, all flashed a deep, pulsing red that the translation system helpfully identified as imminent death warning. 3 of the Somnathi, tall, willowy creatures who experience strong emotions as involuntary hibernation, simply fell asleep where they sat, toppling gently onto their neighbors like expensive, unconscious dominoes. Taro, the 7-foot insectoid warrior with 3 border wars on his resume, let out a sound that the translator rendered with what seemed like genuine reluctance as a shriek of profound existential alarm, and folded all 6 of his limbs inward until he was approximately the size of a carry-on bag. Counselor Veth, dignified, luminous 40 years of diplomatic experience, melted. Not metaphorically. Veth's species, when sufficiently startled, involuntarily liquefied their outer membrane. Veth became, in the span of about 2 seconds, a glowing puddle in the shape of a very distinguished chair. The holographic notepad floated sadly in the middle of him. Remy watched all of this. Then he looked back at the screen, where the movie was building nicely toward the second act. "Oh, this part is good," he said, and ate more popcorn. The alien to his left, a 4-armed, gray-feathered academic named Professor Quion, who had written 14 papers on human behavioral psychology and considered himself something of an expert, stared at Remy with all 4 of his eyes at once, which for his species indicated a level of confusion that bordered on a medical event. "You are," Quion said slowly, not afraid. Remy glanced at him. Of the movie? Of the creature, the darkness, the sounds, the harbingers of annihilation playing out before us. Remy considered the screen for a moment. "I mean, the pacing is a little slow in the second act," he said. "But the practical effects are great. You see the way they did the lighting in that basement shot? That's craftsmanship." Quion looked at the screen. He looked at Remy. He looked at his own hands, which were shaking. He wrote something in his notepad. He underlined it twice. On screen, the meat hook guy appeared for the first time, and the theater somehow got louder. Taro had folded himself even smaller. 2 more Somnathi had gone unconscious. Someone in the back was emitting a sound that only existed in frequencies humans could not hear, but which was causing mild structural vibration in the seating pods. Remy finished the popcorn. He looked into the empty bucket with quiet devastation. "I should have gotten the large," he said. 12 minutes into the film, Station Meridian-9's central AI Mira made a decision. Mira stood for Meridian Integrated Response Architecture, and she was, by any reasonable measure, the most sophisticated artificial intelligence in the Galactic Union. She managed life support for 40,000 station residents, mediated diplomatic communications across 400 species, and could simultaneously process the environmental needs of beings who breathed everything from nitrogen to liquid ammonia. She was calm, precise, and virtually unflappable. She flapped. "Attention," Mira announced, her voice cutting smoothly through the chaos of the theater. "I am pausing the cultural presentation for an emergency welfare assessment." The screen went dark. The house lights came up. 6,000 aliens exhaled in approximately 400 different ways, several of which were audible, 2 of which were visible, and 1 of which briefly set a seat cushion on fire. Taro slowly unfolded himself, reassembling his dignity 1 limb at a time, with the careful concentration of a man pretending he had not just been a ball. Counselor Veth began the process of re-solidifying, pulling himself back into an upright shape with the slow, luminous dignity of a being who was absolutely not going to acknowledge what had just happened. The holographic notepad was still floating in the middle of where Veth had been. He collected it without comment. Professor Keon was already writing furiously. Mira's interface projection appeared at the front of the theater, a cool, blue geometric shape that served as her visual presence during formal addresses. She scanned the room. Then she did something that the station logs would later record as the first time Mira had ever performed a secondary scan of the same subject within the same second. She was looking at Remy. Remy was looking at the bottom of his empty popcorn bucket. "Ambassador Cole," Mira said, with the careful, measured tone of someone approaching a situation they had not been programmed to handle. "I want you to know that the station's full medical and psychological support team is standing by." Remy looked up. "For what?" A ripple moved through the theater. 6,000 beings leaned forward with collective concern. This was, several of them would later report, the most alarming thing they had witnessed all evening, including the meat hook. "For you," Mira said, "given the nature of the content you have just been exposed to." Remy stared at the blue geometric shape for a long moment. "The movie?" he said. The presentation depicted graphic threat scenarios, predatory pursuit, and repeated simulated mortality events, Mira said. "Standard protocol for trauma exposure of this magnitude requires immediate psychological evaluation. It is a horror film," Remy said. "Yes," said Mira. "That is what they are supposed to do," Remy said. "Yes," said Mira, and then paused for 0.003 seconds, which for her was the equivalent of a very long, uncomfortable silence. "Ambassador, your biometric readings throughout the presentation showed a heart rate elevation of only 4%, no cortisol spike, stable respiratory function, and what our sensors identified as repeated voluntary consumption of food matter." "I was eating popcorn," Remy said. During the mortality events, Mira clarified. "That is when popcorn is for," Remy said. The ripple went through the theater again, in the other direction this time. Counselor Veth, now approximately 80% re-solidified, made a sound that his translator rendered as deeply unsettled agreement with the AI's concern. Taro, fully reassembled and doing an excellent impression of a warrior who had simply been resting his limbs, crossed 2 of his 6 arms and said nothing. But, in a way that communicated volumes, Professor Quillon raised one of his 4 hands. "If I may," Quillon said, standing, "I have studied human behavioral documentation extensively. 14 papers, peer-reviewed. And I want to say, with all academic respect, that what I witnessed this evening does not align with any psychological profile I have on record. He turned to look at Remy directly. You smiled, Queeman said, during the basement scene. The theater went very quiet. It was a good shot, Remy said. Quillon sat back down and underlined something in his notepad so hard the stylus made a noise. Mira recalibrated. Ambassador Cole, in the interest of diplomatic transparency, I must inform you that an emergency session of the Cultural Exchange Committee has been requested by 47 member species in the last 9 minutes. Remy blinked. Because of the movie? Because of you, Mira said. Watching the movie. Remy looked around the theater. 6,000 beings from 400 civilizations were staring at him, with expressions ranging from baffled to genuinely frightened. And not one of them was looking at the dark screen where the horror movie had been playing 12 minutes ago. He pointed at the screen. Can we at least finish the film first? He asked. The Somnathi in row 7 woke up briefly, heard this, and went back to sleep. Mira dimmed the blue light. The emergency session, she said, very gently, has already begun. The emergency session was held in Theater Meridian-9's auxiliary diplomatic chamber, which was a very grand name for a room they had clearly set up in about 11 minutes. The chairs were still arranged in a rough semicircle, one of the holographic banners was slightly crooked, and someone had forgotten to remove a snack cart from the corner, which Remy noticed immediately and filed away for later. He sat at the center table, alone, facing representatives from 47 species, with Counselor Veth presiding from a slightly elevated platform at the front. Veth had fully resolidified by this point and was radiating the particular energy of a diplomat who was absolutely holding it together and absolutely had not recently been a puddle. Taro stood at the back, arms crossed. All 6 of them. Professor Quillen sat in the front row with his notepad, looking like a scientist who had just discovered that his entire thesis needed rewriting and was equal parts devastated and thrilled about it. Mira observed from the ceiling. Veth opened the session with a slow, formal pulse of bioluminescence that the translator identified as grave procedural solemnity, and then said, Ambassador Cole. We have gathered to understand. Great, said Remy. Can I grab something from that snack cart first? Veth pulsed again. The translator said pain diplomatic tolerance. Remy stayed seated. We wish to understand, Veth continued, how a member of your species is capable of consuming food matter, experiencing apparent enjoyment, and providing critical commentary on production values during a presentation that, by every measurable biological indicator, caused acute psychological distress in 6,000 sentient beings. Remy opened his mouth. We also wish to understand, Veth added, why humanity chose this as their cultural submission in the first place. Remy closed his mouth, thought about it, opened it again. Okay, he said. So, horror. 47 representatives leaned forward simultaneously. Quillon's stylus was already moving. Horror is a genre, Remy began. It is a category of story that humans make specifically to be scary. On purpose, by design. We sit down, we choose to watch something frightening, and we enjoy the experience of being frightened while knowing, in the back of our heads, that we are completely safe. Silence. We do this for fun, Remy added, in case that part had not been clear. The representative from the Brokai flashed a deep, confused orange. The translator said voluntary fear consumption, query unresolved. One of the Somnathi swayed slightly but stayed upright, which was frankly an achievement. Taro uncrossed one set of arms, then crossed them again. "You are saying," he said slowly in the deep, resonant tone of a warrior who had faced genuine mortal danger on 3 separate occasions and found it considerably less puzzling than this conversation, that your species recreates threatening scenarios deliberately and then watches them for leisure. "Yes," said Remy. "While eating," Taro said. "The eating is important," Remy said. "You need something to do with your hands." Taro stared at his own hands. He had 12 fingers distributed across 6 limbs. He seemed to be reconsidering several things at once. "Think of it like this," Remy said, leaning forward, warming up now. "You know how some species do extreme physical activities for recreation, like high-altitude climbing or deep-pressure diving, or whatever the Keth Dominion does with the gravity wells on Taro's homeworld, which I have heard about and genuinely respect?" Several representatives nodded, or performed their species' equivalent thereof. "Same energy," Remy said. "Your body gets the experience of danger. Your brain gets the chemicals, the adrenaline, the tension, the release. But nobody actually gets hurt, because it is a movie. It is a controlled environment. It is like a roller coaster for your nervous system." He paused. "Do any of you have roller coasters?" Guillaume raised a hand. "The Valhari have a gravitational amusement structure that has been banned on 6 planets. That counts," Remy said, pointing at him. "Same thing." Counselor Veth pulsed slowly. "But the distress response," Veth said. "The fear itself. You experience it?" "Sure," Remy said. "And you enjoy that?" "Yeah, the fear. The whole package," Remy said. "The tension building up, the jump scare hitting, the feeling after when your heart is going and you are laughing a little because you got. It is great." That basement scene was a genuinely well-constructed bit of filmmaking. "Did you see how they used the shadow framing before the reveal? Whoever lit that scene deserves an award." Veth stared at him, or performed the gelatinous, luminous equivalent of staring. "You were," Veth said very carefully, critiquing the cinematography. "It was good cinematography," Remy said. Quillian made a noise that was either a laugh or a sob, and wrote something in very large letters across an entire page of his notepad. The representative from the Somnathi, a tall willowy being named Essel, who had managed to stay conscious throughout the entire session through what appeared to be sheer willpower, raised a delicate hand and said, in a very small voice, "Ambassador Cole." When the figure appeared from the darkness and the music became very loud, "The first meat hook reveal," Remy said, nodding. "Classic." Essel swallowed. "What did you feel?" Remy thought about it honestly. "Honestly," he said, "I felt like I wanted more popcorn." Essel sat down very slowly. Taro filed a formal protest with Mira on the spot, which Mira logged under a new category she created in real time, labeling it Human Recreational Neurology, Ongoing Inquiry, Classification Pending. Remy looked at the snack cart in the corner. Nobody stopped him this time. The diplomatic session had been running for 40 minutes. Remy was on his second bag of something the snack cart labeled as crystalline flavor pods, which tasted approximately like salt and vinegar chips if the vinegar had gone to a better school. He had decided he liked them. He had also decided somewhere around minute 30 that the session was going in circles, and had begun doing that thing humans do in long meetings where they appear to be listening while actually being somewhere else entirely in their heads. Veth was mid-sentence about the psychological implications of voluntary threat simulation on interspecies diplomatic perception, which was a very long way of saying we are still confused and also a little personally offended, when Remy straightened up in his chair and raised his hand. Veth stopped. 47 representatives looked at Remy. "Quick question," Remy said. When is the sequel screening? The room did not explode, technically, but it did the diplomatic equivalent, which in some ways was worse. The Barokai representative flashed a color that had no translation because no situation had previously required it. Mira logged it as chromatic distress, unprecedented. The Varathi contingent, who had been maintaining a careful, studied calm since the theater incident, collectively shimmered and shifted 18 inches to the left as a group, which for their species indicated a threat response so fundamental it bypassed conscious thought entirely. Taro made a sound. It was not words. It was not quite a sound that had a name. It was the noise a being makes when they have been a professional warrior for 30 years, have faced things that would end lesser creatures, and have just discovered that the most unsettling thing in their career is a 34-year-old human in a hoodie asking about a sequel. There is a sequel, Remy continued helpfully, because he had apparently decided that helpful was the tone this moment required. The Hollow, Season 2. They introduced a second villain. There is a twist in the third act that genuinely got me the first time, and the practical effects budget went up significantly. The cinematography is even better. There is this one chase sequence through a cornfield at night that is legitimately masterful. Professor Quion had stopped writing. He was staring at Remy with all four eyes and the expression of a scientist watching his entire academic framework quietly fold itself into a paper airplane and fly out a window. "You want," Queeman said, very slowly, "to do this again." "I mean, yeah," Remy said. "This is what film festivals are. You watch multiple movies. That is the format." Ambassador Cole, Counselor Veth said, and there was something in Veth's voice that had not been there before. Something that sat right on the border between diplomatic composure and genuine, personal, deeply felt bewilderment. "Are you telling me that this evening was not, for you, an ordeal to be endured, but rather the first installment of a planned series of events? I thought that was the whole point of a cultural exchange program," Remy said. "You exchange culture. I brought horror. We could do a double feature. Maybe a marathon if people are up for it. I have got a list." He pulled out his phone. He had a list. It had 43 entries. Mira scanned it from the ceiling, processed the titles in 0.7 seconds, cross-referenced them against the medical incident report from earlier that evening, and experienced what her diagnostic systems logged as a processing conflict between task completion parameters and self-preservation instincts, which was remarkable because Mira did not technically have self-preservation instincts. She was developing them now. "Ambassador," Mira said carefully, "several of the titles on your list feature what I can only describe as escalating threat scenarios." "That is the genre," Remy confirmed. Entry number 7 appears to involve a sentient weather phenomenon that hunts by sound. "Classic," Remy said. Entry number 19, Mira continued, with the tone of someone reading a damage report in real time, "is described in your notes as, and I am quoting directly, the one that made me sleep with the lights on for a week. Good times." Remy nodded thoughtfully. "That one is genuinely special. You really feel it." Essel, the Sumnathi representative, who had been heroically conscious for this entire session, chose this precise moment to finally succumb and fell asleep sitting upright in her chair, tipping sideways in slow motion onto the shoulder of the Brokai representative next to her, who flashed in. Alarmed Yellow and carefully propped her back up, because even in a crisis, interspecies courtesy matters. Taro stepped forward from the back of the room. He uncrossed all 6 arms, which for a Keth warrior was a gesture that typically preceded either a formal challenge or a deeply serious statement. He drew himself up to his full 7-foot height. He looked down at Remy Cole, cultural ambassador, hoodie wearer, holder of a 43-item horror watch list, eater of crystalline flavor pods. "I will say this once," Taro said, "and I will say it as a warrior who has faced the void between stars, who has stood in the wreckage of 3 conflicts and walked away, and who has never in 30 years of service shown fear to an enemy." The room was absolutely silent. Taro pointed at Remy's phone. "Entry number 7, he said. "The sound one." "Yeah," Remy said. "How long is it?" Taro said. Remy checked. 97 minutes. Taro was quiet for a moment. "Is there a snack cart at the theater?" he said. Remy smiled. "I will sort it out." The room erupted. 47 representatives speaking, pulsing, shimmering, and in one case briefly levitating, all at once in a chaotic symphony of interspecies panic that Mira attempted to moderate and immediately gave up on, rerouting her processing power to what she considered a more productive task, which was drafting a formal communication to the Galactic Union's Executive Council with the subject line Urgent Advisory, Human Cultural Programming, Immediate Review Required. Veth reliquefied slightly at the edges. Just slightly. He pulled himself back together with great dignity, looked at Remy, and said in a voice that carried the full weight of 40 years of diplomatic experience and approximately 40 minutes of genuine personal crisis, "Ambassador Cole, I must ask, is any of it at all, frightening to you?" Remy thought about it. "The nacho situation," he said. "I have been asking about nachos since I got here, and nobody has given me a straight answer. That is starting to concern me." Veth pulsed once. The translator said resigned acceptance of the fundamental unknowability of humanity. It was the most accurate thing the translator had ever produced. The Galactic Union's Cultural Exchange Committee met the following morning to issue their official findings. This was, by any historical measure, the fastest the committee had ever convened. Normally, formal assessments took months. There were procedures, subcommittees, review panels, documents that needed to be filed in triplicate across 17 bureaucratic systems that had been designed by 17 different species and were famously incompatible with each other in ways that nobody had fixed, because fixing them would require another subcommittee. They got it done overnight. That alone should tell you something. Remy found out about the verdict the same way he found out about most things, which was Mira appearing as a soft blue light in the corner of his quarters at 7 a.m. while he was making coffee and informing him, with the careful tone of someone delivering news they personally found. Complicated. That the committee had reached a conclusion and he might want to sit down. Remy did not sit down. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter. Mira presented the document. It was titled Informal Galactic Union Script, Advisory Bulletin 7214, regarding human species interaction with simulated threat media, recommended precautionary measures for member species, classified Priority 1. Priority 1. Remy sipped his coffee. He read it. The bulletin was 11 pages long and covered, in exhaustive diplomatic language, the events of the previous evening. It documented with extensive footnotes the biological incident reports from 6,000 attendees. It referenced Professor Quion's emergency field notes, which had apparently been submitted as supporting evidence and ran to 37 pages, with a conclusion section that Quion had titled, with what Remy felt was a very satisfying lack of academic restraint. They are doing it on purpose. And they like it. It included Mira's sensor logs, the Varathi teleportation incident, the formal protest filed by Taro, and a detailed appendix covering Remy's 43-item watch list, each entry assessed individually for potential diplomatic hazard. Entry number 19 had its own subsection. The bulletin's formal recommendations were as follows. First, that no horror media of human origin be screened at Galactic Union events without a mandatory pre-screening review panel and a minimum 30-day psychological preparation period for attending species. Second, that human cultural ambassadors attending film screenings be required to provide advance notice if they intended to consume food during the presentation to prevent other species from interpreting the behavior as evidence of immunity to mortal threat, which apparently several species had. Found more frightening than the film itself. Third, that the concept of the sequel be added to the Galactic Union's official diplomatic glossary, filed under human-specific cultural phenomena requiring ongoing study. And fourth, in a subsection that Mira read aloud with what Remy could only describe as a very pointed pause before and after, that Taro of the Keth Dominion had formally requested to be notified of the screening date for entry number 7 on Ambassador Cole's watch list, and wished it noted in. The official record that this request was made in a spirit of cultural curiosity, and not under any circumstances personal interest. Remy put his coffee down. He picked up his phone. He opened the review system he used for cultural events, the same one he used back home for restaurants and weekend trips, and once, memorably, for a particularly bad layover in a transit hub on the Velhari border. He pulled up the bulletin. He gave it 3 stars. He wrote, in the comments field, thorough. Good footnotes. Appreciated the individual entry assessments on the watch list. Shows attention to detail. Knocked off 2 stars because nobody has still told me about the nacho situation, and I feel this was within scope of the review. Would recommend with reservations. He submitted it. Mara processed the submission for 0.004 seconds, which was, by her standards, a stunned silence. Ambassador Cole, she said, you have submitted a consumer review of an official Galactic Union Priority 1 advisory bulletin. 3 stars, Remy said. The nachos thing is a real gap. Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will flag the catering infrastructure concern to the relevant subcommittee. Appreciate it, Remy said. He finished his coffee. He picked up his phone, opened his watch list, and moved entry number 7 to the top of the list. Then he sent a message to the station's theater coordinator asking about available screening dates, snack cart capacity, and whether there was any possibility of getting actual nachos by then with cheese. Not the synthesized kind, the real kind. Because some things were worth being specific about. He CC'd Taro. He BCC'd Veth, because he felt Veth deserved the opportunity to prepare. Somewhere across the station, in the Cultural Affairs office, Counselor Veth received the notification, read the subject line, which said simply Movie Night 2, checking availability, and began very slowly to reliquefy at the edges. Just slightly. And somewhere in the Galactic Union's vast, ancient, sophisticated record of 400 civilizations and 10,000 years of interspecies history, a new file was opened. It sat between humans, general behavioral overview, and humans, dietary customs, see also the popcorn incident. It was titled simply Humans Horror. It had 1 entry so far. It said, they are fine. They are having a great time. That is the problem. The file was marked ongoing. Remy Cole, cultural ambassador, 3-star reviewer, and the most unintentionally terrifying being to attend a film screening in recorded Galactic history, put on his hoodie, picked up his phone, and went to find out if anyone on the station knew how to make nachos. They did not. But he was, as always, optimistic.